Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on person-centred thinking in mental health services. My name's Rob and I'm hosting the webinar. I hope you can all hear me. The presentation will last about 30 minutes, followed by time for questions. Questions can be typed into the question box on the right of your screen anytime during the presentation or afterwards, and I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Any that I can't answer today, I'm very happy to respond by email or to speak on the phone. Just a little background. I've recently joined the HSA team to lead on mental health. My previous role was as Chief Executive of the Local Mind Association, and before that I've worked in mental health for about 15 years in a variety of settings. I'm hoping that today's webinar will give you some ideas as to how person-centred thinking and practice can be employed in mental health services, and that I'll have the opportunity to have further conversations with as many of you as possible in order to explore this area further. Email details, Twitter contacts and other useful links will be available for you to get in touch. A recording of the webinar will be made available, and there are all sorts of resources on the HSA website which can be used to put some of these ideas. Support in mental health services by looking at practical person-centred tools which may be of particular interest in different service settings and in common situations in mental health services. We'll be looking at examples to support person-centred thinking which are all straightforward, practical and repeatable in services, but which can produce exceptional results. Some of the tools we will use will be using me as an example, and this isn't a promise due to ego issues on my part. It's a core principle at HSA that in order to create truly person-centred services, it's vital to work in a person-centred way ourselves. So we use the tools that we recommend others use and work in a way that we support others to work. And there's no reason to suppose that a great analytical tool which works for one person can't work for another, regardless of whatever their current mental health issues might be. One of the most pervasive difficulties I found in mental health services, particularly when working with people who've been using services for a long time, is the perception of people who use services that they're somehow separate from what they see as the rest of us, and that this basically means that they're not normal. As I've had that put to that, they're not normal and unable to do the things that other people do in their lives. Now, unfortunately, the reason for this belief is probably due to this being exactly the way people have been treated in their lives. But I believe strongly that a way to start overcoming this is to be able to demonstrate the similarities between the aspirations and the needs of people, whatever label they might currently have, and following the same principles when working in a team or with the people we support is a great way to start breaking down those barriers. Today, the first tool we'll be looking at is the one-page profile, which is one of our core tools, creating a great foundation for personalised support. We'll then go on to look at an analytical tool called 4+1 questions. We'll look at the Stay Well plan, which helps people to plan their support in a more holistic and positive way, and what's working, not working, which is a way of assessing the current reality of the situation from a number of perspectives. In each case, we'll look at when these tools might be useful and how they can be incorporated into the work we do already. We'll end by looking at person-centred reviews, which is a process using some of the tools we're looking at in the webinar, designed to get the most out of review meetings and aid positive and successful planning. All of these tools could have a webinar to themselves, so this isn't intended to be training in how to use the tools. Rather, it's a whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we do at HSA, which might give you ideas you want to explore further. So, one-page profiles. This is me, and this is my one-page profile, which I completed as part of the recruitment process when joining HSA. Some of you may be familiar with one-page profiles, as they're established as an example of best practice in many service sectors, but just in case, I'll quickly run through what they are. So a one-page profile is a means of gathering and sharing important information about a person in order to be able to work with that person as effectively as possible. They contain 3 sections. One is an appreciation section, which describes what people like and admire about a person. So why is this important? Well, we're all familiar with the concept of building on strengths. The like and admire section gives a great insight into what a person's strengths are. The second section is what's important to me. And this is very important that this comes from the person. We'd argue that you can't hope to offer support to support someone effectively if you don't understand their motivations, their priorities, and what makes them tick. The third section shows what a person needs in their own words. If we're going to provide person-centred support, then a person's view of their own support needs is absolutely critical. Now, one-page profiles can be completed by the person themselves, as I did with mine, This involved unusual and slightly awkward conversations with people I've known for years and would never dream of asking what they like and admire about me. But they can be completed as part of an assessment, or in a meeting with a member of staff, or in a meeting with peers, with family members, or even through phone conversations. Completing a one-page profile would normally take around an hour, including discussions and write-up, so it's completely possible within a regular one-to-one session. The primary use of one-page profiles is to gather and share information about the people we support, so that staff can know what they need to know, and that this knowledge is easy to share. There are other advantages and uses of one-page profiles, which I'll look at in a minute, but let's focus on this one for now. A comment you sometimes hear about one-page profiles is that we know all this information about the people we support, and that's fantastic news. Unfortunately, in my experience, this information is always known about some of the people we support, but some of the people, by some of the staff, and it's known eventually. I see the biggest strength of using one-page profiles as the ability it gives to know this information for all the people we support quickly, and to make this readily available and easy to share with others. Now, clearly, you don't have to have a one-page profile in order to work in a person-centered way with an individual. But I would argue that you do have to know the information contained in a one-page profile to work in a person-centered way. Now, it's not that long since I was working as a provider, working for a local mine association, and I can honestly say I've never come across a more succinct or straightforward way of gathering and sharing this key information about a person. So, as far as I'm concerned, these are an excellent tool to use in mental health services. I'd now like to have a look at some particular applications for one-page profiles in mental health services. Now, I mentioned jokingly the question on self-esteem, about having difficult conversations and asking people what they liked and admired about me. But there is a real benefit in terms of self-esteem of using one-page profiles, finding out that people do like and admire things about you, even though you may never have that conversation with them. And some of the people we work with, the social isolation they experience, the contact they have in society, the stigma that affects people, means that they sometimes would never hear anything positive about themselves. And it's a huge boost to someone's self-esteem to hear that there are qualities about that person that are valued and appreciated by others. And this is even before you start thinking about the effect of people's illnesses and the conditions that people have on self-esteem. So if you're depressed or anxious, your self-esteem is going to be through the floor anyway. So simply the effect of knowing what people like and admire about you is incredibly powerful. They really help with starting conversations with people. You find out about people's interests, passions, what people's expertise is. Even something as simple as finding out if someone is a morning person or not can make a radical difference to how a service is received and how a person interacts with their support. I think there's a huge use for one-page profiles in terms of assessment. It gives a totally different focus to how someone feels when they come to a service, looking at what the person brings, what interests they have, what they need from the service, rather than a more traditional approach of what problems do you cause, what is the risk that you pose, here is what we offer, which bits of it do you want. It's just a fundamental switch around of those questions, which I think feels very different in terms of assessment, and is particularly maybe from the perspective of a family member who is seeing that this is the information we're interested, this service is interested in, rather than the same old things about risk and problems that have been caused in the past. There's a great use in terms of matching staff and volunteers to the needs of the people who use services. So, for an example, on my one-page profile, it will say that I'm obsessive about music. So if I have the opportunity to support someone who is also obsessive about music to go to a record fair of a weekend, I'm going to be waiting in the car park, engine running, ready to go. And that's, we all know that sort of when you've got that match of enthusiasm and interest from a member of staff and someone who uses the service, then any support that's offered within that is going to be far more effective. And the final area I wanted to mention in terms of the use of one-page profiles is in terms of peer support And this is an area where I would really like to do some more work and really try and establish how we can use one-page profiles to enhance peer support. I think there is, in terms of how you come into a peer support group, how the group understands what your needs are, how you understand what their needs are, and in working with people potentially with complex needs, people I've worked with in the past with borderline personality diagnoses, I think that's a very powerful way of enhancing a group experience and making group work more effective. So I'd be really interested to hear from anybody who would be interested in exploring how one-page profiles can work in terms of peer support. There are all sorts of webinars and resources on the HSA website and on YouTube about one-page profiles, so there's loads of information there. So if you'd like to look into that in more detail, then there's lots available, and the links are at the end of the webinar. So we've looked at one of our tools, and one-page profile is one of our key person-centered tools. And I suppose one of the things that we are looking to do is to help people to develop a toolkit of person-centered tools. Key to doing any job is to have the right tool for the job you're trying to do and know how to use it. And when person-centered practices are really established in an organisation, you've got people who know what tool to use in a particular situation. It becomes second nature, and things just flow beautifully from there. So I mean, that's what we want to achieve in mental health services as it has been achieved in other areas. And for me, I'm not a particularly process-driven person, so the biggest thing I've found about using person-centered tools and processes is the quality and depth of the information you get by following a process. You might get 60% of the way there just by sort of leaping into a discussion like I was used to and then charging towards a solution, but by following a process you get a much more high quality, get more high quality information and are therefore able to make a better decision. So a good example of this is the next thing I wanted to look at, which is 4+1 questions. Why is it called 4+1 questions and not just 5 questions? It's because 4 questions are for analysing and 1 question is for planning to look forward. So this is an analytical tool for problem solving. It requires a bit of discipline in terms of timekeeping and sticking to a process. There is a tendency, I think, as I've just mentioned, to leap towards the bottom question, the +1, the what do we want to do next. But it's actually through analysing the 4 areas above that we really get to understand more deeply what we need to do next. But the questions are straightforward. So it's what have we tried, what have we learned, what are we pleased about, what are we concerned about? And then leading into an action plan that makes sense and which everybody can feel they've contributed to. There are techniques involved in using this process. It's make sure that we hear from everybody. Sometimes can be useful to spend a bit of time. If you say you're going to spend 5 minutes on the first section, then spend 5 minutes. If all comments dry up after 2, you'd be amazed how often you're silent for a minute and then the best idea of the day pops out later on. So it's things like that. Take a bit of practice and a bit of guidance, but these are straightforward to use. And again, sort of reverting to an example involving me, this is a 4+1 that I did. And basically I decided to have a career change, move from my previous role as a chief executive into something else. And this is the kind of question that can lead you to just becoming stuck and then panicking and then going to watch telly. So I went through the 4+1 questions with my wife very kindly writing down notes for me. And I think the first thing I wanted to try and get across is just the quantity of information that came out. And it made me look at the situation I was in a much more in-depth, more balanced way. in much more detail to think about work I've done previously in a different way, and to sort of nail down the type of solution that I was looking for, so which in my case was the type of role I was looking for, and led to an action plan, which is really, really important, rather than just analysing the problem, panicking and then ignoring it. Led on to an action plan, which I was able to follow. So where would this be useful in mental health services? So the first thing that comes to mind is with groups who can become stuck. Now that could be a group of staff who are stuck in a way of working and want to make a change but don't know quite what that change is. It can be a group, maybe a social group or a peer support group who have kind of reached one of those plateaus where things aren't changing and people are starting to disengage. It's a great tool for analysing and moving forward in a sort of democratic and inclusive way. I think they've got an application in terms of therapeutic relationships. So whether that's a tool for a counselling supervisor to use with a supervisee, it's not a clinical tool, but there's absolutely no reason why a clinical discussion can't take place within the 4+1 questions framework. Or in something like a long-term key working relationship, where frequently I think as a manager we have a tendency, if you think a key working relationship has become stuck, the option often from the staff perspective is to change the key worker, but that really may not suit the person who's using the service. So this can be a sort of, where have we got to, how do we move on from here, and a great tool for that sort of situation. I think it's a question again of using this as a correct tool at the correct time in the correct in the right sort of situation. But as a tool to have and to use, I think it's extremely useful and very applicable to mental health services. As I said, this is a kind of a whistle-stop tool. I'd love to do more on 4+1 questions, so maybe this can be a part of a future webinar or future discussion. Next question I wanted to move on to is probably the most fundamental question that we ought to be looking at in mental health services. It's the question of what keeps you well. It's a simple question, it's hard to answer. The reason that picture's there is that is somebody, it's not me, it's somebody cycling through the Chilterns on a mountain bike, which is something I love to do. Having said that, it's something that I love to do, it is also something which I know, in terms of my own well-being, keeps me well. And I think the tool we're looking at now, which is called the Stay Well Plan, is something which helps you to see, so whether that's the individual person or the staff team or whoever is supporting, could be a family, to understand the holistic need the holistic needs in terms of staying well. So rather than thinking about things of what stops you becoming ill, which might be things that are more like medication or maintaining a routine, or the sort of things that usually get mentioned, looking at the stuff that what makes you stay well, and what enhances your life, what makes it, what makes you worth getting up in the morning. So the Stay Well Plan looks like this: 3 fairly straightforward questions. My initial response when I saw this for the first time is that it's altogether more positive than looking at a crisis plan or a risk assessment or a care plan. It starts off with what helps me stay well. Now that is going to include stuff that would go on a crisis plan, would go on a CPA. So it doesn't run against them, but it brings in the more holistic needs of the individual, and to a certain extent gives them the same weight. So they were talking about the example of cycling, or someone who wanted to go walking twice a week and said that really helped keep them well. The reality in most service settings is that isn't going to be given as much weight as someone taking their medication regularly, although they might actually be equally important to that person in terms of what keeps them well. But only one of those two activities mentioned would ever get cancelled because there was short staff. So I think it really demonstrates that there is a sort of multifaceted approach to keeping well, and that is more important than just the basics. Then looking at sort of what contributes to me becoming unwell, and then moving from that to an action plan to stay well, which is a very positive, very inclusive way of looking at someone's well-being. So an action plan to stay well can involve everybody, rather than it just being a plan of things for staff to do if someone becomes ill. And as I said at the start, this is the most fundamental question. The most fundamental function of a mental health service is to try and support people to remain well. And so this, I think, is a tool that we could adapt and use extremely well. The next question let's look at. Now, I don't know if anybody who is listening is a big fan of the West Wing, but if you are, then this is going to be something that you recognise. In order to make good decisions about where we want to go in the future, we really need to know how things are at the moment, where we are at the moment. And so looking at these two maps, you just have to look and point to where you live. And it turns out it's not as easy as you might have thought, because these are two perspectives, two different projections of the world, and everything is in a different place to where you would expect it to be. So just really trying to show that in order to find the current reality of the situation, we do need to look from different angles. Where you look from one perspective may be radically different, where you appear to be, maybe radically different than looking from another perspective. And to try and make those informed decisions, this is the type of process we need to go through. So the tool that we use, or one of the tools that we use to analyse the current reality of a situation, is called working, not working. And you'll see on the graphic there that in this example we're looking at an individual, so we're looking at what's working and not working from the person's perspective, from the family perspective, and from staff perspective. So that might be something that we looked at in a review meeting, like an internal review meeting, or in just a discussion to try and look at a particular problem. You can use this tool in a wide variety of areas, so it could be used from an organisational level. You could say what's working and not working from an organisational level, from the perspective of the people who use the service, from the people who work in the service, and from a wider perspective of the organisation, its strategic goals and stakeholders and people working with the organisation from outside, so commissioners and whoever we're talking about. I found it to be an incredibly useful tool and to have a wide variety of applications. It's one of the ones that we use a lot so we use the one-page profile as a cornerstone. We also use working, not working as a cornerstone of lots of our processes. Very important in that it gets everybody's views. It isn't just people who speak up, who get heard through using this tool. We make sure that we get everybody's views. And as somebody who I'm aware has spoken up too much in meetings in the past, it's absolutely important it's incredibly important to get everybody's views, and to give them equal weight by writing them down and being able to look at them. It allows us to identify themes and priorities. It allows us to build on strengths and to address weaknesses. Often the focus in meetings, whether this is in team meetings or about an individual, is on what is not working. You have a meeting to discuss a problem. You have a meeting as a response to something which has gone wrong. So this can be used to get more of a balance of remembering that large amounts of what we do is working, and that can be built on and improved. And something which from speaking to Michelle, who works at HSA the other day, who said that by identifying these priorities, and it can help us look where we want to be. And Michelle said that when we know where we want to be, we're motivated to get there, and we become increasingly motivated to get there. Whereas when you know where you don't want to be, you simply are very motivated to leave, but you become less bothered about where you go because you've left where you don't want to be. So it can really help this to turn around the priorities and then to look at where you want to be, and to help people maintain and improve motivation to get there. So another key person-centered tool, which again I think has got a wide variety of applications in mental health services. Now, before moving on to the next slide, I'd really like it if you could just try, and it's nothing horrible, I promise, but if you could just try and think about what your gut reaction to the next slide is, because I know what mine is, and well, here we go. So this slide is called Your Meeting. So moving on to look at review meetings and person-centered reviews. And the reason I chose this slide is because this is not dissimilar, unfortunately, to my first ever experience of a CPA meeting, a care program approach meeting, which I had in about 15 years ago in a hospital in West London. The table is much shinier in this, and people are dressed more uniformly. But other than that, it is surprisingly similar and worryingly similar. You would have a consultant psychiatrist at the end of a table, with often arranged in sort of decreasing importance of seniority, like a royal court, his staff, and then a place for the person who the meeting is about at the end. And in the meeting that I went to, a place for support staff and family members off the table, just sort of at a slightly lower level, sitting by the wall, which is where we were. Now, my reaction to that is I don't want to be in that meeting, and I'm sure that would be your reaction as well. And that is, I am not currently feeling unwell. I'm not currently feeling paranoid. I'm not currently trying to convince people that I no longer need to be in a hospital I don't want to be in. If I was in that position, I think that this could be actually damaging to my mental health and my ability to express myself. So an extreme example, yes, but unfortunately not so extreme that it could possibly happen. My view is that especially when you're as a service user, your contact often with the person who is most influential in your support, which is unfortunately probably your psychiatrist, is primarily in meetings. Poorly managed meetings really can reinforce views that people who use services are more unwell than they actually are, that they need more medication than they actually need, that they need to remain in hospital for longer than they do, that they're more challenging and more obstructive than they actually are, because this is the environment in which they are seen, and this is where they are supposed to try and express themselves and say what they need. So things have moved on since meetings were done like this, but we are really keen to look at how meetings in mental health services, and in particular key meetings like CPA, are managed and carried out in a more person-centred way. We've started working with a provider in the northeast of England on developing a person-centred CPA process, but it's something that we're really keen to look at, because it's absolutely key to how people receive their support and how support is planned. So our person-centred review meeting process, which we would apply to CPA meetings or any other meetings in mental health, looks a little bit like this. There's quite a lot of detail on this slide. It may be a bit tricky to see, but again, there are webinars and further information on person-centred reviews on the HSA website. So some of these steps on this process require doing things differently to current review processes. Others are just stating steps on a process that would be happening already. So the first step, in terms of who to involve, all that we're really asking here is to think about it rather than just repeating the last lot of invites, and actually give some consideration to who needs to be at the meeting and who the person wants to be there, who's important in the person's life. Looking at things like how to involve the person. There are tools that we could use, such as communication charts and decision-making agreements, or it could just be a conversation with somebody about how they want to be involved, what they want the meeting to be like. If they want it to be a meeting at all, there are many people who don't want to have this taking place in a meeting. There are areas that are easier to do in a meeting, but it's not vital to the process that there is actually a big meeting involved. Things like how the family need to be supported, if the family members are involved, how the meeting is prepared for. I'm speaking as somebody who has a relative with needs that require support, and the involvement of family members in review meetings is generally disastrous and highly counterproductive and causes endless problems throughout the year. In my brother's particular case, so I think this is something which is very much worth looking at in a great deal of detail. Things like creating a relaxed atmosphere, so the exact opposite of the previous slide. And the process follows through using tools like, if you look down towards the sort of bottom right area, you've got the working, not working tool from the different perspectives. You've got questions that come out of that need to be answered. You've got things like what's important to me now and what's important in the future. And just different ways of gathering information, different ways of coming to a decision, getting that rich information that we're looking for to inform better decisions, and then coming out with an action plan. Now, one of the sort of initial reactions you would get to looking at this process is that we don't have time, particularly if we're talking about CPA, you know, care coordinators who are pushed for time and cannot devote this amount of resource to a meeting. Now, what I would argue about that is that an ineffective CPA is completely wasted time, or an ineffective review is completely wasted time, and all that leads to is a meeting for a meeting's sake, and then all the actual work in terms of making decisions, in terms of liaising with family members and carers and whoever else is involved takes place outside of that time. So if you take a sort of a wider view, a really well-managed, well-facilitated review meeting can save time over the course of a few months, where it may take, you know, a couple of hours as opposed to an hour to do on the day. It may look daunting, but it's an extremely positive process, and something where you can feel like you're actually getting somewhere. And the biggest frustration that most people, I think, have in services and in meetings is that you feel like you're not getting anywhere. So the idea here is to make sure that there is progress. And some of the work in terms of the, if you take, for example, the important to me now and important in the future, that can take place as part of a regular one-to-one session between a care coordinator and someone who uses a service, or in another environment. So it doesn't have to be all taking place within the meeting. There can be lots of preparation beforehand, which can make the meetings go much more smoothly. So this is another area where I'm really sort of asking people who are interested in looking at how review meetings, whether they be statutory meetings or internal review meetings, can be adapted and improved to get in touch. And this is something that we'd really like to look at. And as I said, we're looking at it at the moment with a provider in the North East, but I think there's huge scope for this to work, and to work really well. So that has sort of concludes the whiz round some of the tools that we're looking at today. The next step is, as I said, to try and I'm really keen to try and have as many discussions and conversations with people who are interested in making person-centered support in mental health more of a reality than it is currently, to identify some of the barriers that there are. I know some from having worked in services for a long time, but more perspectives, particularly in, I've not worked in clinical settings, in hospital settings, so it'd be really interesting to hear what people think if they're working in those settings. And to say that we're looking, it's a huge passion of mine to adapt person-centered, to make sure that person-centered support is a reality in mental health services. So I'm really keen, if you're interested in getting in touch and having a discussion about anything that we can that we might be able to do together, then that would be fantastic. And in order to do that, these are all the contact details. There are if we tweet for HSA, you can get in touch with us by email, through Facebook, and there's some other links there to resources which may be useful. So we've kind of come to the end of the presentation of the webinar. Thank you very, very much for listening, and I am now happy to answer any questions. I can see there's something else. I'm going to see if I can open up. Are we there? Yes, we are. That was from before the presentation. So the question here, would you see the one-page profile as the output of the assessment rather than being the assessment? I think possibly, yes. I would think of it, seeing it as the assessment is, yes, that's probably not accurate. So I wouldn't use it as an assessment tool, but I would think it would be something that we ought to be in an assessment trying to find out that information, and maybe as a stage of assessment, or as a stage, maybe assessment's the wrong word, maybe it's about checking out whether a service is going to be suitable for someone and finding out about what makes them tick, to use the process of producing a one-page profile as a means of finding out about somebody. So I think that's a good point. It's probably a question of me using not quite the right word during the course of the webinar, but I think that it's the focus on the person from the very, very start, which I think is potentially really, really powerful. Asking someone, when you if you're considering whether someone is coming to use your service, asking them what people like and admire about them is not something that usually takes place. I think it just gives a fundamentally different flavour to what the first impression of the service would be, and shows really clearly that we'd be trying to work in a person-centered way from the very, very start. So I think that's the point I was trying to make. I'm hoping that answers your question. Second question I've got: we would love to work with you about peer support in our services in London. But the answer to that is yes, brilliant. That sounds fantastic, and please get in touch. That would be wonderful. And so another question from Alison. I heard that people who live their lives with mental health issues prefer appreciation rather than like and admire for one-page profiles. Does it matter, or is it just about what works for the person? Well, that's not something that I have heard, but it may well be true. My initial response is it is about what works for the person. It is fundamentally a person-centered approach. So if it is, if it's called appreciation, if it's called like and admire, I like the words like and admire because I think to a certain extent admire is stronger than appreciate, because you might appreciate someone. It just feels like a stronger word. It's something more positive. So to say that someone admires something about me, but absolutely it's about the individual person and what works best for them, and that's something certainly that we'd love to look at in terms of how the two things work and what we can what works best for people. Okay, how have you in practice used predominant methods like outcome and recovery star in an integrated manner with one-page profiles and more detailed person-centered support plans? That's a fantastic question, and it's one, if you don't mind, that I would like to be able to respond in more detail to. So what I can say now is that there is we have worked with things, for example, like the Recovery Start, and integrated those into the existing person-centered tools that we use. But it's something which I would like, in order to give you the best answer to the question, I would like to just check out a couple of things before responding. So I hope that's okay, and I'm happy to forward that response to anybody else who's interested on the webinar. I'll just make it available with the recording possibly. I'm not quite sure what's possible technically, but if that's okay, I'd quite like to come back on that one. Right, another question is, I was asked recently by one of my colleagues about important to and people who live their lives with a delusional content, e.g. being addressed as the Queen, etc. From their perspective, this isn't important to them. I don't know if there's more to that question. But how do we record this respectfully and helpfully? I think we record it as important too, but look for a balance within the profile, how we best support the person. What are your thoughts? I think it's best that we are all clear about the purpose. I guess it's all to do with making sure that we are clear about the purpose of the one-page profile and whose voice is authentic within it. Something I'm learning from doing this is that I need to make the question box on the webinar bigger, otherwise I can't read it properly. I think that's a really, really interesting question. That it is important, for example, it is important to someone that they're addressed as the Queen. However, there will be a balance that, as you say, there will be a balance important for that, unless you happen to be working with the Queen, that this is unlikely to be the way in which other people will be comfortable addressing that person. It's one of those things that I think on an individual level we can absolutely record that this is important too. There will be a balance from different perspectives in terms of important for, because that, while it may seem relatively harmless, it has the potential to cause issues for that person. I've worked with somebody who insisted on that he was addressed in a certain way, and insisted that his role in society was extraordinarily important in terms of spiritual and sort of almost a magical sense, and kind of had got to a point where we agreed that that's what he thought, and he agreed that I didn't necessarily agree with him, and it is. But I think even the acknowledgement that that is important to someone is quite powerful, because a more usual way of dealing with that in the past would be to simply dismiss it and to mock someone for that. So it is something which I think again, it was so interesting to look at that in more detail. It's not. And just to work that through, so that there's so many ideas that are coming out. This is absolutely fantastic. Right, we do have another question. A question from Michelle: does using these tools take more time? I suppose the question, more time than what, would be my response to that. I think that our evidence shows that doing things thoroughly and properly, in general, in almost any sphere of life, doing things thoroughly and properly takes a little more time at the time, but saves time in the long run. And while it's about the value that the tools bring and the information that you get. So I think using a tool like we've been looking at can, when you're getting used to it, can take a little bit more time, but it can prevent you from having the same conversation in every single staff meeting that you ever have. And I think, you know, anybody who's managed services, worked in services will appreciate that you have things that just never ever get resolved. And there's absolutely no question in my mind that using tools productively and efficiently saves time and improves the services that we offer. So I will happily take up a challenge to show that that's the case if anyone wants to do it. I've got another question. As a provider, we are taking a pragmatic view of one-page profile development, developing them alongside with the person as the preferred way, but also doing this in the background for those people who would not wish this to happen for whatever reason. We are using the latter as an offering for us to start conversations by saying, we have really been listening to you. Have we got it right? What do you think? And then moving on from there. This builds a different way in for conversations and the person to realise that they do have a voice that is listened to. Any thoughts? I think the issues of engagement in mental health services are going to be one of the things that comes up. You will have people, we've all worked with people who don't want to do this sort of thing. And I think in your case, it sounds to me like, what are your options in that case? You don't do a one-page profile for that person? Well, that doesn't seem to me to be a very good option. It starts to give the impression that, that this is not for everybody, that potentially this information is not available from some people. So my view, my initial response is that absolutely this is probably the right way to go. The risk, I suppose, as I'm sure you're aware, would be that not doing it with someone becomes something that people revert to due to things like a lack of time. And this is not just due to people being sort of lazy or difficult. It's just about, you know, sometimes it's about resources and the practicalities of doing stuff on a particular day. And if the door is open a little bit to take a shortcut, sometimes people will take it for the very best reasons. And so as I'm sure you're doing, it's guarding against that, looking for every possible way to engage with that person, looking for every opportunity that it could, that it can work. But I think if you get down to the point where it's either do one with your best guess, with integrity about what someone is thinking, or what someone feels, or not do it at all, I think you're absolutely on the right side of that. The next question from Donna, are person-centered tools the same as recovery tools, or is there a difference? I think that there is a difference. Recovery tools could be and can be very person-centered, but not necessarily. Person-centered tools can be used to support recovery, but that's not necessarily what they're for specifically. So I think what we should be aiming for is to use person-centered tools within a recovery model. So a recovery tool might be something like the Recovery Star. A person-centered tool might be something that you use to get someone's perspective on their life, which enables you to use the Recovery Star more effectively. We would argue that person-centered tools, person-centered techniques can be applied to across the board, but HSA will say that there isn't a problem that a person-centered tool can't be used for. So I think there's a difference between one is specifically, you know, a good recovery tool will be person-centered if used properly. A person-centered tool and person-centered thinking tools are excellent at sort of getting the information you need in order to use recovery tools. I hope that makes sense. Oh, excellent presentation, Paul. Thank you very much, Donna. Is there any research base to the 4+1 questions or the Stay Well plan? Now, that is something I will have to come back to you on, as I would need to check through what the research base is and to come back to you on. So if it's okay, I will be able to respond to that in more detail, but I need to check a couple of things out first. And something from Alison about love to work with you about reviews as well. Well, I think yes, we definitely need to talk. That's really, really encouraging. I'm delighted. The question from Donna, thinking about person-centered CPA reviews, I find a huge difference between reviews in hospital and reviews in the community. Do you have a comment about this, and do you find the same? The simple answer is yes. There is a huge difference between reviews in hospital and reviews in the community. I think that it's not necessarily the case, but you do tend to find a less person-centered, more medical-based model followed in hospitals, and I suppose that is no surprise given that hospitals are medical establishments. They are larger institutions that find it difficult to change and adapt. Something which I think, and it's a tricky one in relation to CPA, because providers are not in control of CPA, but I think if we can demonstrate, I keep saying we, I'm not working as a provider anymore, but if a provider can demonstrate that they have a more effective way and can support the facilitation of CPA so it's more productive, I think that would be a fantastic way of trying to change the practice within hospitals, because I think they can adapt, but it needs key people, particularly consultant psychiatrists who tend to run these meetings or be heavily involved. If they can see that what's coming out of these meetings is better, then it is something which people are very, very happy to try and adapt to. I think there's more difficulty with the philosophy of person-centeredness. Sometimes I think it's just best to show how good it is, and then try and get people to adopt that from there. Okay, so the question from Pippa Woodford: how have you engaged a team who are unfamiliar to person-centered tools and believe they are very person-centered yet are resistant to change? Well, sometimes that's the $64,000 question, I think. So it's a very, very pertinent. In my more glib moments, I would say that everybody thinks they're person-centered. People have been recruited on the basis of saying that they're person-centered a lot of the time. I think it depends very much, I think, on the leadership within the team and how well that is. They understand the idea of person-centeredness. I think you can come from a philosophical perspective of if they get the underpinning thing about being person-centered, then you go with that first, and you can then introduce the tools. I think a way to engage with teams is to actually look at some of the tools. A really great one to do that with is our tool on positive and productive meetings, because it doesn't matter where you go, everybody can improve their meetings. And the positive and productive meetings tool is so effective in terms of improving meetings that you're sort of looking for a way to demonstrate that these tools that we're talking about are not airy-fairy lovely stuff, but they're actually practical, usable things that help people to do things that they do better. I come from a perspective where I believe that most people, the vast majority of people involved in mental health services, are doing these jobs because they are coming from the right place. They want to help people to do their job, to get more out of their lives. And so I think if you can get to demonstrate the effectiveness of some things, then the chances are that people will be more open to looking at looking at other areas. The other tool that we have that we can use is that we have a tool called Progress for Providers, which is a kind of self-assessment tool about how, so you can see how you're progressing against in terms of sort of progress towards personalisation. So it's a good way to come in if you've got someone who's interested in personalisation. You can look and see how you're progressing against any sort of not standards is the wrong thing, against benchmarks of how integrated person-centered, how person-centered you are, basically. So statements ranging from "we know about it, but we don't really do anything different yet" to other statements at the other end that sort of everything we do is person-centered. So that's a good way in. I think I've probably got time for one more question. And are you planning to do, Alison asked, are you planning to do a Progress for Providers for mental health providers? That would be ace. I completely agree with you. And I think, yes, is something we did. I'd really, really love to look at Progress for Providers, particularly looking at benchmarks for particular service areas such as peer support or information provision, which is something an awful lot of people do. Or so I think, yes, there's a huge potential to expand Progress for Providers into mental health. We obviously want to work with partners to do that. And I think, Pippa, thank you very much for your last comment. That's lovely. And I think actually that's the last question that we have. So if there are any other questions or any other comments, then please do get in touch. I've really enjoyed doing this presentation and just having the chance to talk to people who are interested in looking at things in more detail. So I'm hoping that this will be something that which generates more conversations, more opportunities, and something that we can all look back at the start of something where we can and see where we go from here. So thank you very, very much for listening, and I am so if there are any further questions, then please do get in touch. So thank you very, very much.